Okay, all of those people who want to go home by 3:30, think about your 27 questions. Councillor Philly, you want to go home early? You haven't missed a question so far. I'm going to reopen and we are going to revert to item 9. For those of you who can remember what that was about, that was the quarterly report. And we've achieved we achieved our savings target, which is good news, but there's a lot more to do in the part of the organisation that was Iki Panuku as well as in the group shared services. It's good we're doing this quarterly report close to the end of the quarter, not 2 or 3 months later. So thank you, Ross and Karuna. Up to you, and I have some questions.
Councillor Dalton second.
Deputy Mayor and Dalton, okay. Ready, go.
Kia ora. So for the Q4 report, we will take it as read. Just a couple of things to note. As Ross mentioned earlier, the financial and non-financial results are preliminary and subject to audit adjustments per the usual process, with final audited results being released on the NZX late August with annual report adoption in September. The report has been put together from across the business, but we're happy to take any questions related to the report.
We're going to go to questions, and the first one up there belongs to me. And as the Chief Executive suggested several hours ago, for those of you who can remember, that it might be about asset sales at what the section formerly known as Iki Panuku, who achieved 11 out of 60 million and 14 out of 32 million. Can you hear me? Yeah. And I just think because that waiting until the market come right is not a good answer to that. I want to see a real progressive effort in the sales. We have just spent a whole lot of money on equalising or making fair the local boards, who are all going to say, oh, we haven't got enough money, but they're all sitting on assets which are underutilised. So in the last 2 days, I've had an asking the question, have we got a good stock take of property, used and unused? And I had one person who said yes, and the next person said no. So what is the answer? Do we have a good stock take of assets? And if not, why not, and when will we? So that's the first question.
So the team that have come across into the new property department do have a list of assets that are scheduled for sale, that have been approved. But as the Chief Executive said earlier, decisions were made due to market situations around whether to act on those sales at that time or to postpone them. And that will continue to be acted and by the property department and obviously be led by your decisions.
Well, it's not quite the answer I wanted. It's a list of what they have got for sale, but have we got a list of what we've got? Because the market know things that we've got, and things come just like complaints, opportunities come to the mayor. And I get opportunities presented of various bits and pieces of property which aren't on anybody's list, but we do owe them. And so property needs to be continuously for sale, even if you decide not to. And we've got to learn how do we deal with unsolicited bids, because people out there seem to know that we've got, that people inside here don't seem to know we've got. So that's a question. I'm looking, this is all leading to why did we only sell 11 of the 60 million, which was not the governing body's estimate, it was the estimate from the people who were going to sell it.
Okay, so I'll try and assist Your Worship. So again, I totally understand the broader point that's being made here, but, you know, in terms of that particular asset target, that was the list that was agreed around this table. The sale processes were progressed. They were ultimately, and I'm generalising here, they were ultimately stopped at the Eke Panuku board level because the judgment was that it was suboptimal to sell them at that time for that price when things might recover and we'll do better. Turning to the more general question, yes, we have a list of property assets, a fulsome list of property. In fact, we have a fulsome list of all of our assets. Part of the process, and we've discussed this in the context of what's happening with local boards currently, and I acknowledge there's an appetite amongst local boards for better advice and support in terms of considering how they optimise those assets. That's a good thing. They are seeking from us more clarity about what assets they've got, what condition they're in, and what they might sell, trade, etc. in their local areas to optimise what they've got. I'm interested in the sale proceeds. Frankly, I'm more interested in the assistance that provides in managing the downstream operating cost in relation to those assets. To the third point, we do have a formal process around unsolicited bids. I'd point you for reference to the procurement area where we do provide that. And finally, and more generally again, I've heard the message, the organisation has heard the message about being a little bit more commercial, a little bit more responsive in terms of what the opportunities are in the property space. That message has been given through into the property area, and things will move. But I do make the point that at the end of the day, there's a political dimension to most of these sale processes, and they can go as fast or as slow as you let them go when the decisions ultimately come through to you. So, heard the point, and that would be my response, Your Worship.
Well, that's quite a good response, but I think that one of the things that slows down sales is when people have an alternative form of funds. So we give Eke Panuku a budget of cash. They will say slow it down until things are better. If you give them no cash, they'll sell things. And property prices go up and down. And it's not only the fact that the price goes down at some stage, what you can buy for it, you get more at that same time. So buying and selling in the same market doesn't really matter so much. But I just want to see more innovation. I think that waiting for things to get better is not a managerial solution. If that's what a managerial solution is, we don't need the staff. We just wait till things get better. That's not managing. That's waiting for God, really. I do have another question. Two more. GS, the Group Shared Services, is making progress. And AI is circling out there. Are we doing any training for AI for the staff and even for the people around the table here? Some companies have climbed into it. And at a business meeting yesterday, I played a recording of my daughter's company's AI, and it blew everybody away. I've played it to our guys. We can't do that, but we are a classic case of AI being a far better answerer of the telephone than what we've got, because AI will give you instant access to the files that the person's ringing about, whereas no human being can have instant access to all the files which we're dealing with. So are we doing it? What are we doing there? And do we have any budgets for it? Do we have any planning for it?
So, yes, the answer is yes, we are using it where it's appropriate, that we have teams across the organisation looking into it and taking advice, looking at opportunities where they are safe and appropriate, and the technologies team are looking at training across the organisation for staff in how we can safely and appropriately
Well, I think
leverage
that-
the advantages.
That's good, but you need some training to understand what it is even looking at. And so I think that next year, for those of us, some of us may well return, or some may not, but those back here would appreciate some AI training themselves, because it has quite an opportunity for even the documentation spread that we all face here. It allows us to make some use of the huge volume of information which we hold on our website, but it's bewildering. It's like reading the Bible. I don't know where to start, so I never have. But
We'll incorporate something into the elected member induction and development program. As Michael has said, there's some things happening in the organisation now. One of the things that's happening very shortly is that we're going to, and you can accuse us of being a little bit behind the times perhaps, but these things need to be handled a little bit carefully in our context, including, we've just had an item talking about high performance, high engagement, union relationships and what have you. I've got to be careful how this stuff is implemented in the organisation. We're going to develop some principles around that. There is discussions with the unions and what have you at the moment. I'm aware yourself in election mode have made some comments about customer services using AI. We have hundreds of people who are employed in that space, and I need to navigate that territory carefully, and will do so. But we will make progress. AI will be part of the future, done in the right way, in the right areas, at the right time for the organisation.
a good answer. Two small questions. I see that under temporary traffic management, we removed 7,500 redundant pieces of TTM. They might well be cones. I don't know what redundant pieces are. What happened to them? What do we do with those? Well, we don't want to replace them. We want to move. That's moving them, not removing them. Removing them means they go to the landfill or melted down or something or other. Rather than, I have some sympathy with Councillor Watson and certainly finding they're all up there. Last thing, I went through here and on every page I kept thinking about this, the implementation of the changes to the CCOs is a very large piece of work, and I commend the Chief Executive and the management for tackling it. But the point isn't just to have people sitting at different desks. How do we embed a change in attitude? Because we've spoken to the senior managers who seem to have that, and then customers go along and meet our people there and they get the same, no, you can't do that. How do we do that? Is there any thoughts about that?
Yes, I've been quite clear, I think, with you that we're at a certain point in the change process. We've dealt with some structural issues and what have you, but there's more work to do, and that's part of a change process over the coming weeks and months. It does start with having absolute clarity about the direction at a management and leadership level. I think we've made good progress in that, and I referenced a workshop last week with those people to discuss exactly this in the sort of development space. It will roll out, and I'm not even remotely defensive about this, but there are aspects of the council role that sometimes involve saying no, or it's not tenable or permissible in that area. So I can't change overnight every experience being one of yes, you can do what you like in the region. That would be an abdication of our responsibility in terms of regulatory matters. We can make, however, the experience of people dealing with us user friendly. We can be clearer sooner in terms of what the development constraints are on areas and such like. and that's part of what we're doing. And wherever possible, if we can find solutions rather than just present problems, we will do so. And that messaging is clear in the organisation, I would like to think, and we put a lot of energy into the leadership levels understanding it.
Thank you for that. Councillor.
Thank you. Look, just going back to the properties, the real losses we're facing is deterioration of abandoned council properties that we're sitting on. I remember Mr. Stabak saying, I think it was 1,438 or something, ancillary council properties, as he put it, hanging around our necks. I've not seen I asked once for a list of them all grouped in local board area, if that's how they had to come. But, you know, I can name Project K at Huia, I can name the mill campsite in Piha, there's the Scout Den in Tirarangi, there's the Shelley Beach shop and campground in up on the Kaipara, on the edge of the Kaipara. They're sitting there empty, have been for years, going downhill. There's a lease agreement for the Shelley Beach shop, but it's so over the top, no one's picking it up, and there's also market pressures. So while this takes place, the real loss in value is as they deteriorate. And I've taken people out and visited some of these places, and I took Mr. Potter out and showed him some of these places. So if we're not using them, then we need a strategy, and we need a strategy that the governing body can work with the local boards to identify because we do need to, if we're not using them, we might as well quit them and get what we can for them before they're worth nothing.
I think that's very good. I have to say I've given an example to the system to see whether it works. A lot of the stuff, there was a time before we got sensible about collecting development contributions where as a developer you could get away with giving a certain percentage of your land to the council and calling it a reserve. And there's always a shot that you can get rid of. And because it's got reserve on it now, everyone thinks that that's untouchable. But in fact, a lot of it's not being used as a reserve. That money could be used by the local board to take another person, buy some swings and slides and do something good. So I'm trying to get some fresh thinking out of this, which goes with what you're saying, I think.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I agree. I understand the complexities and the problems with trying to move this stuff on, but if we get caught in that limbo and they just sit there slowly deteriorating to a point of no return, then we've lost more than yeah. Thank you.
Chief Executive heard you. Councillor Stewart.
Yes, just sort of following on from what Councillor Turner was talking about, I was going to ask a very similar question, and I know it's something that is very close to the heart of Councillor Williamson. He loves information, so the more information you can give him, he'll spit it out and he'll tell you what it's costing us and what we could make out of it. And, you know, some of these residential properties that we've got across the region, you know, some of them we're renting them out, and so we're missing out on rates, and we could actually be making some quite, you know, they're just as residential rents. And then we've got a whole lot of property all over the Auckland region, and especially out near the Eastern Busway, something that Councillor Williamson will probably pick up on, that, you know, we have squatters in them, and when we've asked Ekapanuka or whichever department we think need the Eastern Busway or Auckland Transport or whoever, they, you know, that we say there's squatters in these some of these buildings, and they say, well, we can't move them. Well, I tell you what, we'd be far better to sell all those buildings, and even the derelict ones, would be better to sell them, make some money, get some rates in, and stop sitting on all these, as Councillor Turner was saying, all these buildings that are all useless.
I don't think that was a question, but it was very good to listen to. Councillor Sayers.
Yeah, thank you. Just two things around probably understanding the trends or movements in a couple of areas. One's going back to the AI, and Phil, do you have discussions at a senior leadership level about how AI might be able to be utilised around qualifying a building consent or a resource consent application so we don't get so many RFIs coming through? Is that part of a bigger strategy?
That is one of the areas that's being explored. Councillors may have noted a government decree to move in the direction of AI assessment of resource consents. The exact language they use for that planning process escapes me, but there are examples in the building consent and resource consent area where applications are initially assessed at least through AI, and there are moves afoot to look at how we could do something like that here. Yeah,
That's very good to hear. Thank you.
And I'll go one step further and say it may be that in due course we need to come to you and discuss further the investment that we need in technology in the organisation to make this transformation from where we are now to where, for example, that would have us in the future. We've got some investment, but it's pretty much tied to the core information systems in the organisation, and some of these other things represent a proposition that we may need to discuss next year in terms of budget. So I thank you for your enthusiasm in advance when we come to talk to you about what it actually costs.
Yeah, all right, very good, thank you. And Phil, this might be appropriate for you or not, or you can redirect it, but I'm sure it's the same for every ward councillor. It's very easy for us down to the dollar to find out how much our wards pay in general rates, targeted rates and uniform charges, a whole lot. That's easy to get from the organisation. What's impossible to get is the spend back into each ward, because there's some sub-regional projects, there's some regional projects, and the ability to be able to proportionate that, we don't seem to go down that exercise. But certainly when I was chairing the budget committee, it was very difficult for me to understand by ward of our total spend back what was going into each ward. I'm sure councillors and ratepayers are equally as interested in that. So is there any thought being given to that, Phil, about how we can do that? Multinational companies across countries can do it. I can't see why we couldn't make those same assumptions and calculations.
Well, we can look at it. I have serious doubts that it would make sense to do some of that budget information at a ward level. Obviously, an increasing amount of it is understood at a local board level, but not all, because some of it's cross-boundary and regional in nature. So, I think you would follow that carving up the budget purely for that purpose at a ward level, when those boundaries differ from local board boundaries, for example, would be quite onerous and expensive, I think, for probably, some value, but not a huge amount.
I don't think maybe it doesn't have to be by ward.
No, probably goes to Councillor Lee's point at other times about the growing misalignment between ward boundaries and local board boundaries, but that's a discussion for another day.
It is something we've been asked about many times in the past, and our assessment's generally been that the level of assumptions and that you would need to make to apportion it are so high that it creates sort of an artificial accuracy. Most of the services we provide that are net rates funded are network services, and they only work as a network. They don't work in geographic isolation. And then the last key point, I suppose, is also that just because someone pays rates in one part of the city doesn't mean that they don't work in a different part of the city or recreate in another part as well. So, but thank you.
Councillor Watson, please.
Just following on from the asset sales questions, this council has been involved in what has been a fairly fulsome asset sales program for much of the last decade, if not longer. So I think, and I don't know how many other properties are out there. There's probably a few. I don't know if we're down to hocking off the dead ball areas at Stanmore Bay Reserve or whatever. But what would be useful, I think, Mr. CEO, and you certainly gave a very considered and appropriate response, I think, if we could have some looking backwards just to see how many assets have been sold, because they are substantial. And to the Mayor's point, I guess it is useful to see what is left if we're going to be old Mother Hubbard and, strip the cupboard bare. So I make that request because it's useful to get some longer term view of how that asset sales program has gone. My question it goes to the notion of unsolicited bids, or however you might like, inquiries, however you might like to categorise them. One of the factors that seems to have sparked the whole North Harbour Stadium debacle was such a bid or inquiry from some entity to get some land there that would have suited them. I just wonder what the protocol is then if these bids are coming in for public assets, and in some cases like that, sensitive public assets. Do we have any protocol in terms of notifying any elected personnel or anyone else, or do we just have to wait 2 or 3 years down the track when that's out for public consultation?
Thank you, Councillor. I won't comment on North Harbour. There is, I think I referenced, there is a unsolicited bid process that we have. I think what I might do is circulate that and perhaps a bit of commentary on it after this, so it's understood. It will always ultimately end up back with you for decision, and probably in a shorter time frame than the one you just indicated. Yeah.
Thanks, Phil. I guess my concern is that when it does come before us, as was the case with the stadium, was informed with 2 years' work of private consultants and goodness knows what, incurring a cost, not to mention reputational damage when then it did get out. So I just make that point. Thanks.
Oh, very well. Good point. We've celebrated the excellence for the wharf, which all came from an unsolicited bid as well. Councillor Walker, please.
Sure. And just confirming that I haven't had any altercation with the bus this morning. I just want to make that absolutely certain. Though, as I mentioned earlier, I have been crooked today, and I hope that's noted. Couple of questions. One that goes to the use of AI, and I thoroughly endorse that. Will we have a situation sooner rather than later where AI will have access to all of the council agendas and reports, so that we've got a far better search facility than what we have now? Because right now our search facility is very, very poor, to say the least. And ideally a situation for councillors where there is also a separate but related facility that would include confidential items. I ask this because it would dramatically enhance the efficiency of councillors, local board members, and also members of the public. So that's my first question. Councillor,
I can see Andrew in the back of the room who's going to either nod or shake his head if I get this wrong or right. We of course are moving to a new system post-election. That system has new search functionality, I think based on AI technology. But in any event, people, councillors included, should be able to have a better experience in terms of searching content, in terms of agendas and minutes. Maybe I'll leave it there, Councillor Walker.
Okay, I've got a further question that goes to this, and will this facility also embrace the council-controlled organisations? And by way of an example, I've had an outstanding question that now goes back some years, where I've asked for separated financials, cost and revenue centre based, with some detail on the stadiums that are managed by Auckland Unlimited. Now, I still have not had any information that's at all adequate, and the facility that was provided, I can't even remember the name of it offhand. Councillor Williamson could probably assist me there. It was just woefully inadequate in terms of addressing the information. So there's a real need for this. I'm really tired of asking for some of this information and not getting it for not the right reasons, because I know that the information exists. So going back to my question, will this embrace the CCOs?
Councillor Walker, I'll have to come back to you on that. I suspect the answer is no, or at least not by specific design. But I think your question deserves a more fulsome answer, and I'll have to come back to you outside the meeting.
Okay, well, in that respect, I would strongly recommend it, because most people out there, members of the public, don't make too much of a distinction between the CCOs and all of council. They make the assumption that the CCOs are council-controlled organisations, and that there's a pool of information that's available to councillors and should be members of the public generally. So just like to stand by that. The other question I've got just goes to the matter that Councillor Watson just raised around unsolicited bids and the imperative of making that information available. So by way of example, there's been an unsolicited bid by Golf Warehouse, GOLF, for the Takapuna Golf Club location on and in A.F. Thomas Park. Now, my understanding is that there's significant misinformation in that unsolicited bid, but regretfully, these bids come in, they're not challenged, the information lies on the table, is looked at by council officers, and may have some influence. So I'm raising a specific example, and it goes to the no surprises policy that we have, where certainly at the very least, in this instance, the ward councillors and the councillors north of the bridge and those taking an interest in issues like this should have that information. And frankly, if it's not confidential, so should members of the public, so they know what's going on behind the scenes in the interest of transparency. And it's ever more important because there may be even conflicts of interest inherent in that particular example. So how are we going to get on around these unsolicited bids, Phil, and how quickly will we address this circumstance, because it's coming up with alarming regularity?
Respectfully, Councillor, I think there's quite a few what-ifs and specifics in that question, and I don't think it's appropriate to answer it. I don't have the information about the particular one you're talking about. All I can do is answer it in the same way as I answered Councillor Watson's question, which is to say we'll clarify the detail of that approach around unsolicited bids for you, and we could have a discussion on the basis of that later.
Good question. Unsolicited bids are good and bad. They often alert us to things. We don't want to be in a position where we can't accept a good one just because there might be a bad one floating around. So I want to have a grown-up version of this. I suggest we have that at one of the value committees run by Deputy Mayor. It's the right place to have a discussion about this, or maybe even a workshop, because just banning it is ruling out a whole lot of options. And for every bad one, there's a good one, as I just say. That wonderful work at the port came from an unsolicited bid. Yep. Okay, I didn't mean to open up such a can of worms. You can step back. I think we've had a debate just about as well as questions, but if there's any person who cannot control themselves, oh no, I didn't mean that. Councillor Newman, you've got an opportunity. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon, Your Worship. Look, it's just a comment actually, not a question, so we're on to comments, are we? Well, look, I just want to thank the officers. I think it's quite a good quarterly performance report. That's great. Just to correct a couple of things, so I think if we're going to have a conversation about divesting open space, we're talking about reserves that have reserve status under Reserves Act, and there's quite a process for revocation for that if that were to be the case. But more to the point, Your Worship, I mean, we have, and I know it's probably a fiddly thing called process, but we've just adopted an open space strategy, recreation plan, what have you. It's 98 pages long. It's a consolidation of many other things. We only did that about a month or two back, and I don't really think that the conversation is helped by going through an inventory of shards of land that ask Phil to sell in the fire sale. Secondly, sell to whom in the fire sale? Because if you're selling it to a land banker, I don't think it's necessarily going to see development immediately. I think that there is actually a need for us to have a conversation about unsolicited bids, because I really want to know what's going to happen following the exit from Bill Foley and Mowbray in relation to Western Springs. That would be a good conversation to have. Now, that didn't happen in this quarterly performance period. That's happened subsequent. But I don't think we're going to get a report on that before the election. Maybe we are, but I think we should. And the other thing, Phil, is I think that fundamentally there is the way to address issues with respect to the state of the facilities and whether we are properly funding them is to continue to deal with the issue of depreciation. That is the way to deal with these matters. I don't think it can be resolved any other way. And if we continue to look to fund these assets, then it should put more pressure on people if they want to go on hike rates or everything else, because they won't be able to, because quite frankly we will have funded business as usual well. So that would be my approach, Your Worship. I wasn't going to speak this afternoon, but I think that if you want to talk about a list of things that local boards have to sell because they're not very efficient, I think we just need to have the context for how some of those land parcels are held and the rules around that. Thank you.
Good, thank you. Land is money, and money is land. Good. Reserve money. Okay, it's been moved and seconded, has it been? That's excellent. It was so long ago, I forgot. All those in favour of receiving this report, thank you very much for the work that's gone to that over the